All right, well, let's get started. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining today's webinar on expanding the nation's cybersecurity workforce, a national imperative. I'm Dan Chenok. I'm the Executive Director of the IBM Center for the Business of Government, a former career government official who led cybersecurity and technology policy at OMB in my prior career. And most importantly for today, I'm a fellow of the National Academy of Public Administration. For those of you that are unfamiliar with the Academy, it is a organization, an independent nonprofit dedicated to providing advice for leaders in government on equitable, efficient, and transparent government. Much of NAPA's work is done through the fellowship, which consists of nearly 1,000 government leaders and industry leaders, both current and former, as well as many academic experts in their field in the US and around the world. The Academy provides this kind of advice through studies often, including a study that was recently done with a tremendous staff from the Academy that was called A Call to Action, the Federal Government's Role in Building a Cybersecurity Workforce for the Nation. This study was mandated by Congress to be contracted by DHS to explore these issues. And our panel, which was co-chaired by Karen Evans, who is also my co-chair for the event today. Karen was the former Federal Chief Information Officer at the U.S. Office of Management and Budget, the Chief Information Security Officer at the Department of Homeland Security, and the cyber leader at the Department of Energy, among other posts in her distinguished career. And she is now the head of the Cyber Readiness Institute. Karen and I had the honor of working with a tremendous panel. You'll meet one of them later who will be speaking on the panel. But the study we delivered that has been released and discussed in the last several weeks made a number of findings and recommendations that you can read about by going to the study. And hopefully the NAPA team can put the study link in the chat so you can have easy access to it. Today's session, however, is a broader discussion. It's really sort of taking from the issues raised in the study and other issues around the cyber workforce and talking with an expert panel about what are the pathways forward in addressing this critically important issue for the government and the nation. I'll introduce the moderator for that panel shortly, who is also a partner with the National Academy on this event, Ron Sanders, who is the staff director for Cyber Florida at the Florida Center for Cybersecurity. More about Ron in a minute, but first I have the high honor to introduce remarks from the White House National Cyber Director, Chris Inglis. I had the honor of serving with Chris and Karen on a number of different cybersecurity commissions. His career makes him an ideal first leader for this new statutorily chartered office in the White House. Chris comes to that role having had a distinguished career in the United States Air Force, where he retired as a brigadier general in 2006. He had a long and distinguished tenure at the National Security Agency, where he rose to be the deputy director. He has taught on cyber studies at the U.S. Naval Academy, among his many distinguished posts in his career. So let's now hear a few words from Director Inglis.
Hello, my name is Chris Inglis. I'm the National Cyber Director, and I apologize for not being with you today. At the time you're looking at this, I'm a world away, because I think, as we all know, cyber knows no national boundaries, but it is an issue of national interest. I begin my remarks today by first thanking Dan Chenok for his very gracious introduction, the National Academy of Public Administration for the work they've done to tee this up, and of course NIST and the Department of Commerce for their years of work on this vital issue. So first, a word about what is the National Cyber Director. We are, of course, the newest agency within the federal government. We were created by law about a year and a few months ago. I showed up in the July timeframe. The money showed up in the November timeframe, so we're still nascent. We're still relatively small, getting our sea legs under us. We're essentially at the moment about 30 people, growing to a size of 90. But more importantly are the functions. Our job is to not come in and hierarchically dictate the actions in this space. There are plenty of experts. There are plenty of folks who actually have the authority, the expertise to do what they should do. Our job is to make sense of that. Our job is to connect all of those pieces so that they add up to something greater than the arithmetic sum. We coordinate, not operate. We coach, not quarterback. We're inwardly focused on the parts that we can control within cyberspace. traditionally the roles that are played by chief information security officers, but more importantly, the roles played inside cyberspace by all of us. We also do performance assessment. We will look at not simply how the dollars are expended in this space, but we'll look at whether we have the right roles and responsibilities and whether our people skills are up to snuff. To that end, I've already mentioned briefly what perhaps we might think of as cyberspace, cyberspace the noun. It is, of course, comprised of technology. That's the visible part, might be the pacing part. Everyone knows what version of an iPhone or a Google or an Android version you might have, but people and doctrine are also a component of cyberspace. Why people? People are not merely served by cyberspace, they're in it. The choices they make drive the outcomes, the fortunes, or the pratfalls of cyberspace on a moment-by-moment basis. Doctrine is a component of cyberspace because if we don't get the roles and responsibilities right, then we're in a place where someone might assume someone else is defending something that they care about when no one is. So we have to get all of those pieces right. What's really important about that framing is that two of those three pieces, doctrine and people, are all about people. People are central to the performance of cyberspace. At the National Cyber Director, we spend a lot of time thinking about doctrine. We spend a lot of time thinking about people. More importantly, we think a lot about what NAPA, NIST, and others have done to help us get the people part right. Two of cyber's dimensions being people, I think then that there's work to be done to get that perhaps into a place where we have the resilience, the robustness necessary to create a cyberspace that is defensible and to actually defend it. I think anyone who's looking at this space at the moment, and I'm certain all of the folks in this audience, can say that we have a problem, right? There is smoke issuing forth from the virtual proverbial closet. Not simply do we have 500,000 jobs that are unfilled, but there's weakness everywhere you look. People remain oftentimes the weak link. They're not up to speed in terms of what they need to do. When we think about then what we need to do to create the right people skills, we can't think just about the 500,000 jobs that are empty at the moment across this country in an equal proportion across the world. We have to think about every person who's in cyberspace. So beyond the few who have cyber or IT in their job title, we have to think about those whose daily functions, whether they're lawyers, whether they're computer scientists, whether they're CEOs of companies, we have to think about those people and understand what more do they need to know about the implication of their choices. How do we invest in the programs that create their professional dimensions such that they then understand as much about cyberspace as they might about the environmental needs of our society, as they might about the needs for ethics in any choice that we make. And then finally, in the third cluster, everyone in cyberspace needs to know more about cyberspace than they get by simply being raised in the proximity of technology. Most of us, to be truthful, are not digital natives. Most of us are app natives. We know enough to make the apps do what we want them to do, but we have little understanding beyond that about what's actually happening underneath. And if we don't know something more, a little more about what's happening underneath, then we can't manage the analog of a hot stove in cyberspace. We can't cross the analog of a city street in cyberspace. Everyone has a role to play in their own defense. We therefore, in our cyber education efforts, need to make sure that we address all three of those components. The few is a relative term, 500,000 jobs, the many who perhaps have professions that kind of are implicated in cyber fortunes, and all of us. If we get that right, then we'll be in a place where we can create resilience in our people and ultimately resilience in our doctrine, so that we can put ourselves in a position where if you're a transgressor in this space, you have to get past all of us. You have to beat all of us to beat one of us. I greatly appreciate that NAPA has been working on this, greatly appreciate that NIST, the Department of Commerce, and others have done work over the years to create strength in some of the programs necessary to address this. But we, of course, have further work to do. I think the fact that we have these jobs open at such glaringly large numbers, 500,000 jobs, for just that box of folks who have cyber IT in their job title, says that perhaps we might have misspecified those jobs, says perhaps that we might not have appealed to the broadest possible population. We can address our diversity challenges by making sure that we have every head, every perspective, every talent in the game, by taking another look at how do we create the pipeline and another look at how do we define those jobs. And the marriage of those two, I think, will create an inexorable forward force that will help us solve the problems we have, again, in the two most important dimensions, people and doctrine. The Biden-Harris administration is fully committed to this. We support the efforts that the NIST organization, that NAPA has undertaken. And while there's some further choices to be made in the implementation of certain policies, I think we can all agree that this is a collective responsibility. Again, I wish I could be with you today to discuss and take your ideas, but at the end of the day, the National Cyber Director is going to support fully any initiative which is trying to get us into a better place with respect to preparing the ground such that people and doctrine are our strongest parts. And again, all of us can defend each of us if in fact we think of it as a collective proposition. I wish you all the best for the conference. Thank you so much for your work, and I look forward to seeing you in person as time and circumstances allow.
Well, thanks so much to Director Inglis for those words that will set the tone and tenor for our discussion today. Just a brief note about some logistics. You are in a webinar format, so if you have thoughts to share, please feel free to use the Q&A function. Most of us have been on these sessions many times, so you can ask a question there. You can also leave a comment or a thought. We'll be recording and taking notes on this and doing a report out afterwards to be able to continue the dialogue with Director Inglis, with his team, as they go forward with discussions through the coming months, and with all of you. I now have the very high honor of introducing our moderator for today, the head of Cyber Florida, who is the partner organization for this event and who we've been working with significantly over these last several weeks to bring this together. I'd also note that Ron Sanders provided expert insight to the panel for the NAPA study and has been a longtime leader and mentor for many, including me, in the area of cybersecurity generally and cyber workforce specifically. Ron is a fellow of the Academy. He is, as I said, the director of the Florida Center for Cybersecurity. In his career, he has been a leader in industry as a vice president and fellow at Booz Allen Hamilton, in government as the associate director and chief human capital officer for DNI. And he also led HR policy as the associate director for the Office of Personnel Management. So Ron brings a distinguished career and great perspective and insight, and Ron will introduce the panel. Ron, over to you.
Great, thanks, Dan, and thanks everybody for joining us this afternoon. I will note special thanks to Chris Inglis, and I should point out that he had all of that gray hair before he became National Cybersecurity Director. I knew Chris well back in the intelligence community, and we all got our share of gray hair back then. So look, here's what today is all about. As Dan has said, the NAPA report on national cybersecurity workforce development is sort of the springboard. It's the starting point. That's the what. And frankly, my hope is that a lot of the folks watching today, and I certainly know that our panelists feel this way, we already know about the what. We know about the 500,000 vacancies in cybersecurity. And frankly, I think all of us think that number is grossly understated. But we know that there is a challenge. Today is all about the how. And I'm going to ask our panelists some questions about the how. And then we're going to let you ask our panelists some questions about the how. But at the risk of stating the obvious, that how has become even more important of late. All you have to do is look at the evening news or the news throughout the day and see what's going on in Ukraine and the threats to the United States in cyberspace. And you realize that this isn't just a commercial imperative, it is a national and a national security imperative. So there's some importance behind this. And we should all be grateful that people like Chris Inglis and his team are on the job. We can give them plenty of advice, but they've got to execute. And we're going to try to do everything we can in that regard. So here's how we're going to proceed. We're going to go till about 1 o'clock. And I've got just two rules of engagement. I'm going to introduce our panelists in a second, and I am not going to read their bios. Their bios are lengthy. It would take me 20 minutes to do that. I'm going to give them each a sentence or two of introduction, but if you want more, go to the NAPA website. Their bios there in all of their glory, and frankly, you can find all of them on Google too. So no bios, just a brief introduction. Secondly, we are not going to follow the standard panel format where I ask each panelist to make 5 to 7 minutes of opening remarks. We all know that those 5 to 7 minutes become 10 or 15, and the last person on tap has to suffer through all of the monologues, and they usually run out of time. So I'm not going to do that. Instead, I've worked with each of the panelists to identify one question for each of them that plays to their strengths. However, there's a caveat. We are not going to limit the responses to the individual person I point to. Every one of our panelists is going to be free to join in. That way we can keep this interactive and conversational, and that is the second of our 2 ground rules. We're not going to lecture you for the next 45 minutes to an hour. This is intended to be interactive. You'll get your chance in Karen Evans' final segment. For this one, it's all about the panelists. And let me introduce them now with the idea again that I'm going to ask each of them a pointed question, but encourage the rest of them to chime in. And frankly, if they don't chime in, I may just call on them. So with that, let me begin with Dr. Diana Burley. She is currently the Vice Provost for Research at American University, but also a Professor of Information Technology at AU and a longtime cybersecurity workforce scholar. In fact, I'll tell you a little bit more about her background in a minute, but Diana and I go way back to a panel that we both sat on with the National Academies of Science on the professionalization of the national cybersecurity workforce. And I note that Diane does not have any gray hair, and that's because she's so smart. Dr. Tony Colson. Tony is a professor at, Tony's got gray hair too, a professor at the California State University system in the San Bernardino campus. But his real claim to fame is that he is our leader of the national DHS NSA Centers for Academic Excellence in Cybersecurity community. I know that's a mouthful, but there are over 350 colleges and universities in that community, and we look to Tony for guidance and leadership in all of that. So he brings a wealth of experience there. And then last but not least, Dr. Kostas Torregas. Kostas is at the George Washington University, where he runs their Center for Information Technology. And is it privacy or security, Kostas?
Privacy and security, actually.
Privacy and security, an interesting juxtaposition. Kostas is a Napa Fellow as well. In fact, he was a member of the panel that oversaw this particular study on the cybersecurity workforce development effort, and has been a long time cybersecurity workforce scholar as well. So we're looking forward to hearing from each of these panelists. And that's all the bios you're going to get. All right, panelists, are we ready? We drew straws. Tony Colson got the short one. So he gets question number 1. And these are really open-ended questions. And again, I'll encourage our panelists to chime in. Oh, before I forget, you also see Chuck Romine, his face on camera. Chuck is our designated discussant. And he's indulging us. I've asked Chuck to keep all of the things he wants to say bottled up until the end. And then we're going to turn him loose. And he's going to get 10 or 15 minutes of his own to discuss what the panelists had to say, agree, disagree, whatever, and then add his own 2 cents. So Chuck, welcome. Chuck runs the NIST Information Technology Lab. So he's got 500 folks working for him doing this kind of stuff. So he's got a great perspective as well. All right, so with that, over to Dr. Colson. Tony, again, you are the community leader for the Centers for Academic Excellence, 350 plus colleges and universities, all focused on producing graduates in all of the disciplines that relate to cybersecurity. So you've been at the how wars for some time. I'm going to make you king for the day. You get to give Chris Inglis some advice, and you don't have to actually worry about executing this advice. Chris does. So if you were king for the day, Tony, what advice would you give Chris Inglis in terms of how we proceed in developing a national cybersecurity workforce of the sort that he's envisioned?
Well, first, thanks, Ron, for that kind introduction. But let me go back just a moment. So let me just define the Centers of Academic Excellence, a program that's run out of the NSA, and also in partnership with DHS, CISA, NIST, the Department of Ed, FBI, and a number of others. And so we represent the academic side of this. And as Ron said, 350 plus, it's actually 371 as I think as of this morning, colleges and universities that, we stand ready to serve. We're a resource. And that would be the first thing that I would offer is we are a resource. It's interesting, the perception of academia in my travels is that we are territorial, that we don't move quickly, that we're in our ivory towers and we don't have a vision necessarily. That I get that a lot when I talk to people in industry, and I would say, hold on a minute. When have you ever had 371 colleges, community colleges, and universities working together to help solve one common problem? And so we are now, I would say, a great national resource that should be leveraged as part of this process. And the other part that I would add to that is that we move from idea to action very quickly. The universities that have research programs, the community colleges that are really the boots on the ground in a lot of ways of trying to figure out where the talent lives and how we can move into critical industries as industry ebbs and flows and says, these are the skills we need. They're really on the front end. And then we have, again, this research capability. We have all of these pieces. And again, it's a tremendous resource of creativity. This is why people from around the world come to the United States to these colleges and universities. But one thing that I will say that I have seen in all the partnerships and all of the years is working with the government agencies of how can we help solve this problem is this inherent desire to duplicate or overanalyze, where somebody sees something and they go, we should do that, but let's make it in our little silo, in our little kingdom. And that itself is not only wasteful, but it goes counter to what Chris said, which is coordination, right? Coordinate does not mean necessarily control. Coordinate means how can we all work together, or that other word, collaborate. That's what we're looking for here. And the colleges and universities have learned in this community how to collaborate, how to coordinate. And now it's, let's work with government. And I'm very optimistic about what Chris said, because he's saying, look, we need to look at all the pieces and see how it can all work together. That, I think, is where we stand ready as a community of schools to really assist. But also, I'm very optimistic, because the other part I think that Chris said was, and I know that he said this even in the Solarium Commission, was we've had enough reports. It's time to move to action.
Well, let me pull that thread a bit, and I'll ask Diana and Costas to weigh in. So my organization, Cyber Florida, presides over 12 state universities in the state of Florida, 9 of whom have some sort of Center for Academic Excellence designation. But it is like herding cats. We thought that football rivalries were intense, and it turns out that the intensity is even greater when it comes to competing for students and things like that. So let me ask Diana and Costas, is the common goal of producing more cybersecurity talent, not just 4-year and 6-year degrees, but less, associate's degrees and even certificate programs? Is that common goal enough to overcome all of those rivalries? Diana, let me ask you at American University first, and I'll ask Costas to weigh in.
Well, it ought to be. And I'm gonna attack this from a different perspective, because I don't think that the focus should be on the individual colleges and universities. I think that the focus should be on the accreditation bodies and on the way that we think about higher education, and frankly, even K-12 education. You said that 9 of the 12 institutions in Florida had some type of Center of Academic Excellence. How many of those institutions in Florida have English programs? How many of them have mathematics programs? How many of them have biology programs? All of them. Because there is basic education that needs to happen across all colleges and universities, across all majors, across all areas of concentration, that allows students to become informed, engaged, and competent citizens, regardless of the particular career area in which they go, regardless of the particular type of cybersecurity field that they go into, right? We would never allow our students to leave colleges and universities at any level without a basic command of English as the language of the nation, or of basic mathematics, right? There's certain general competencies that every engaged citizen needs to have. And I would argue that this field, because of the digitization of society and the basic nature, if you think about Chris's buckets of the few, the many, and the masses, everyone, right? We can argue about the level of competence that's necessary for each of those buckets and to move forward in each of those areas. But there is a base level of competence that we all need to have. And until we, as higher education enterprise, an education enterprise, a society, get beyond this notion that only some institutions need to have this, and that this really is a fundamental skill set that all of our students need to have in order to function as effective members of society before we start to compartmentalize into different career fields. We're always going to be playing catch up.
Right. Diana, I really like that. And we're not there yet. I think the focus has tended to be narrow in terms of those folks who can enter the cybersecurity workforce as a profession, if you will, and not so much on good cyber citizenship. Mm-hmm. And Kostas, I'll ask you to talk a little bit about your experience, not just at GW, but otherwise. In the process, I'll note we've actually partnered with something called the National Association for Media Literacy Education to focus on cyber citizenship, but I have to tell you, it is swimming upstream. Diana, we're not yet at the point where all universities and colleges and frankly, even high schools agree that everybody needs to be taught how to be a digital native or a good cyber citizen rather. That's another windmill that I think is worth tilting at. What do you think, Kostas?
Yeah, I think, Ron, both Diana and Tony have really laid a good foundation to your question. I would increase the magnification lens on my microscope and give you a little bit deeper plunge into who is it that has to do something. And sometimes federal agencies think it's the federal government that needs to do something. I think the NAPA report, and those of you that click on the link and read the report, there are 5 basic recommendations, but a key one is that what's needed is coordination. And here now, peeking into my microscope, I'm going to just mention 5 or 6 sectors, all of whom have to work at the same time. Government, for sure. Academia, for sure. But associations, nonprofits, there are more than 20,000 in Washington, D.C., representing all sorts of walks of life. The private sector, both as an employer as well as someone who's competent in cybersecurity efforts. And then finally, training and certification organizations. Now, that's a pretty wide table. And right now, we do not have a table to sit down all these people. We don't know what to call it. We wouldn't know who's going to issue the invitation to coffee and tea. So what we need is more discussion of multiple sectors rather than taking deep dives in any one sector. That's I think the key that unlocks the door to a lot of future benefits. And I like that Chris Inglis said, I'm not a quarterback, I'm a coach, but the problem is he's a coach, but the teams that are playing are not necessarily only in the uniform of his team. They're wearing different uniforms as well. So we got to somehow get the tuba players and we got to get the hot dog vendors all together for that coach to be able to help us as a nation.
Well,
Thanks,
I like Tony Colson's word collaborate, although that's pretty squishy. I think we know more what it isn't. It isn't command and control. And I think we're fortunate that Chris has recognized that the federal government just can't order it and assume that it will be so. This has to be more bottom up. So Diana got the second short straw, so she gets question number two. And it's a good segue because although there may be a common goal that everyone subscribes to, filling all those cybersecurity vacancies and also worrying about cyber citizenship and broader skills like that. For some reason, Diana, we haven't been able to make a big dent in that number. And more importantly, we haven't been able to make a big dent in terms of diversifying that talent pool. Again, we've tended to focus on the cybersecurity professionals, the folks with a degree that says that in the title or double E or something like that. And it's still seen, and I'll be indelicate here, it's still seen as the denizen of young white guys in Star Wars t-shirts. You're the architect. People don't know this about you, but I do. You're at least one of the architects for the National Science Foundation Scholarship for Service program, a scholarship program that has now been mirrored by others, including DoD. But even there, where we offer tuition and other forms of incentives, we haven't been able to make a real dent in that number, particularly when it comes to diversity. How can we improve?
Well, so I would say a couple of things. And one is we certainly need to think more critically about the way we market the field, right? We tend to, and I put myself in this same bucket, is we tend to say two different things at the same time. You know, on the one hand, we say everyone come, and cybersecurity as a field and as the workforce is very diverse and very broad in terms of the different types of roles. And then on the other hand, we tend to focus very much on a narrow set of those roles that perhaps don't attract the type of diversity that we want to see in the field. And so I think that we as a collective, those of us who are defining the field and structuring it, need to be more consistent in the way that we talk about the field and the opportunities and the breadth of those opportunities. But then the other piece is that we have to do a better job of explaining what that is, recognizing that people don't know what it means to be a cybersecurity professional. And the reality is that if I said, what does it mean to be a cybersecurity professional, even to the four of us on this screen, we would probably all lead with something slightly different, right? And that's because it's a field. It is a field of many different professions. And so we've got to have greater clarity in the way that we communicate the types of opportunities. And then the second piece of that is that in that clarity, we also have to identify role models and people who represent the diverse tapestry of society performing in those different roles so that people entering can see themselves in the roles. We can't hold up the young white men in the Star Wars t-shirts and then say this is a field for everyone, because everyone doesn't see themselves in that. And so I know that both Tony and Costas are involved in many different activities that engage diverse groups of students and prioritize pulling in diverse groups of students so that they can get a better understanding of what it actually means to work in the field, and they can see role models and individuals who look like them performing those functions.
So I don't want to steal Costas's thunder, because I'm going to ask him a specific question about this in a minute. But let me ask both Tony and Costas. You work in universities. You see people who have taken a major that may apply to the cybersecurity field writ large. But is it too late then? Tony, what do you think?
Never too late, Ron, and you know this just like anybody else because you've reinvented yourself many different times. It's really finding out what people's currency is. But diversity is probably one of my biggest emphasis points in what I do. And I think a piece that people forget is not everything happens in the Beltway. Not everything happens in major metropolitan areas. We have diverse talent living somewhere in the United States. We just have to find those areas where the talent lives and come up with ways where they can work, where the people in those communities can work in this field. But also to Diana's point is, look, I've been at this university a long time, and we're a Hispanic serving institution, and we had a problem recruiting different demographics. And I said, first of all, the big problem is we're thinking of it from our little office here. How about going out and finding out what attracts people to the other majors? What is it that's there, and how can you find ways to speak to those folks, but also show them a pathway to success? And I think that's where groups like the National Cybersecurity Training and Education Center out of Whatcom Community College has done a fantastic job. I think the CAE community has done a fantastic job. WESIS, Women in Cybersecurity, has just done a fantastic job, but we're only beginning. We're starting to see it really coalesce into rural, especially rural populations and populations where centers where you think these aren't the first places I would go for cyber talent. So that's a long way around your question. Yes, I work at a university, but my mind is that kid that is in 8th grade right now, that young lady who only has a 40% chance of graduating high school that is in my backyard. How do I get to you and show you an opportunity and show you a pathway with multiple stopping off points? I mean, university is one way of looking at it, but there's kids that need career technical education. And are there jobs and opportunities in cyber for career tech? Absolutely. And maybe they're going to stop after high school, but maybe there's a way to get them through community college too. And there's opportunities there. And then also universities. And so we just launched a national initiative. We're starting at a local pilot on just that exact model of pathwaying and focusing on diverse groups and rural opportunities. It's this idea to action idea. And I know that Diana is and I have known each other for years, and I think we both have a very similar philosophy, but also Costas. We work together all the time. And I think that we all have that same kind of mindset. But Costas, did you have something you wanted to add? You're muted.
And Costas,
right, just very, yeah.
let me, sorry to interpose, but I'm going to ask you a specific question about less than degree pathways.
Right. I want to talk about gender, if I can.
Right. So let me ask you about that pipeline. And obviously you can include in your remarks.
Yeah.
Something about gender.
What I wanted to ask, first of all, is pick up on what both Diana and Tony have said, because when you look at race, when you look at gender, the workforce just is imbalanced, terribly imbalanced. And Tony mentioned WESIS, the Women's Cybersecurity. I'm very proud to support that organization. We just had an annual conference with 1,500 women, 800 of which were young ladies who are studying cybersecurity. About 600 were interviewers that were interviewing them for jobs. There's no substitute from walking into a room and looking around you and seeing nothing but women. The empowerment that they felt, because in usual cybersecurity job fairs, cybersecurity competition, cybersecurity this, cybersecurity that, it's all male. It will be like if we get to 20%. Now we were fortunate to have Jen Easterly show up personally at the WESIS conference, and she laid down a challenge, 50 by 30, 50% women by 2030. That's a challenge for the nation. And of course, the same thing goes for race and any other misrepresented minority, because the field is so lucrative. People can write their own checks in cybersecurity. As a consequence, we have to make sure that we open every single door that's possible. So I'm sorry, Ron, I didn't answer your question. What was the question again?
Well, no, I think you did, because look, it's clear that while folks can have an on-ramp to the cybersecurity profession anytime, the fact is, and I'll cite a study I did for the Army many years ago that found that typically 17-year-olds make career life decisions at that early age. And it's often difficult to deflect them after they've made those decisions. So I think it is about the pipeline, and we have to stop preaching it and actually practice it. And Costas, as you suggested, when we hold a competition, and I'll put in a plug for a competition that that my organization is co-sponsoring through an NSA grant for beginners in college. That beginners competition needs to go out of its way to attract women and underrepresented minorities and not default to where the big numbers are, because the big numbers are easy. It's convincing the not yet convinced that they need to be part of that pipeline. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I'm part of the National Cyber League, and we've been monitoring and maintaining percentages. Women participation in the National Cyber League has grown to about 26, 27%. That's not yet 50, but it's a healthy way towards that. I was in contact with a friend in Austria. They just closed out a competition in Austria just so that we don't beat up each other too much in this country. And he shared a picture on LinkedIn. Every single person celebrating the competition, the cybersecurity competition, was male. So I wrote him a little note saying, next year, let's see more female faces in the picture. And importantly, he said, I hope so. So we need to keep the metal to the pedal to the metal on this gender issue, because it won't go away. And again, cybersecurity is too important, and the skills that women bring to the table are far superior and needed, much needed.
So don't just talk about it, do it, and pay attention.
Do it.
Pay attention to the messages we send subliminally. Costas, you got the mic. I'll let you keep it. But again, I'll ask Diana and Tony to comment. What about alternative ways into the profession? Yeah. The focus tends to be on the college graduates and those with a master's degree, but I think we've all realized that there are other more immediate pathways. But for some reason, again, those haven't taken hold. There have been lots of great experiments, successful experiments, an apprentice program here, an apprentice program there, but so far nothing sustained and nothing national. Why is that?
Yeah, so the NAPA project team really did a deep dive onto apprenticeships and other non-traditional forms. Why? Because the traditional academically based programs will not suffice, no matter what the number is. So as a consequence, we really took time to look at apprenticeship programs. And there we found that there's a lot of promise. The Department of Labor has registered apprenticeship programs, and they're beginning to put some more emphasis on apprenticeships in cybersecurity specifically. We're hopeful that we'll see a big spike in federal government agencies, CISOs and CIOs of federal agencies hiring apprentices. An apprentice, for those that don't know, is a very simple way to take people who are willing to study for a job and begin to pay them while they're learning the job itself. And the key component is a mentor inside the agency that can help them. And incentivizing the mentor is one of the key weaknesses that we found in the approach. Let me say one last thing, and then I'll stop. And that is sometimes, and Chris Inglis alluded to it, he said that how we define the job is very important. And I think all too often we've defined the job in a comfortable way, bachelor's degree required. And I think we need to slow down and take a hard look at whether a bachelor's degree is absolutely required for some of the cybersecurity jobs that we're right now begging to fill. Because if we can perhaps find ways to admit people with a good certificate, with a good community college program behind his or her back to come into our cybersecurity team, that can many times be just as strong, if not stronger, than a bachelor's degree. But still, we've got it hardwired into our job requirements. So as a consequence, I think we saw that perhaps taking another look at how we define requirements for cybersecurity jobs is going to be part of the puzzle that we're going to have to solve. Thank you.
Now, Costas, you said a key word, hiring, and that's going to be my final question. So I'll ask all of you to think about it. What responsibilities does an employer have? More detail in a minute. Tony, I'm going to ask you to comment, and then Diana, you get first shot at the all-encompassing question, what should employers do? So I'm going to give you the mic at the end and let you run with it. But first, Tony, we all agree that there are other ways to get into the profession. Costas and the NAPA report cite plenty of examples, but examples are just that. Is there too much emphasis in the NSA DHS Centers for Academic Excellence program on college degrees? And if so, how do we expand that aperture so that we take into account two-year degrees, certificate programs, apprentice programs, and the like as a pipeline, moving beyond the individual successes and making it sort of a SOP?
So, gosh, there's so many other things, because I wanted to also comment on something that Costa said about apprenticeship, but that speaks to your question is, are we only colleges and universities? Yes, we are colleges and universities. Is our focus colleges and universities? And the answer is no. You're seeing K through 12 programs, you're seeing certificate programs, you are seeing programs that reach out to camps, diverse communities, apprentices, and the like. There's something that I think speaks to the last two questions. One involved apprenticeship and finding talent where it lies, and the other speaks to diversity. How many talented people are working in menial jobs because they got to put food on the table? That's where apprenticeship can solve a huge issue, because it's earn money while you learn in an anchor job. You want diversity? That is a great way, is appeal to the people that are struggling to make ends meet and say, you can get educated and maybe get a certificate, maybe get your high school diploma, maybe you're going to go to community college, whatever it is, we're going to enable that for you. And I call this, there's a distinction I give it. It's big A apprenticeship, which is Department of Labor recognized. Right. There's a lot there as far as bureaucracy goes, and there's a lot of resource that has to be committed, but there's a way of doing it with little a apprenticeship. So we're moving in the colleges and universities now, pushing a movement of earn while you learn. How can we give credit for prior learning? How can we accelerate this? How can we make it easier to obtain where people are not choosing between food and education? And I think that is extraordinarily relevant, but it speaks to the fact we're not just concerned with that college bachelor's or master's degree. We are understanding the commitment of the community colleges, and as well as getting into our high schools and identifying talent all the way through down in middle school. I'm going to throw one last plug out there of why this works. We went and identified Title I middle school girls, and we said, we want to take you in partnership with the Girl Scouts. We're going to take you out of your classes one weekend a month, and you're going to do some STEM activity. And then we decided to do a camp. Before we did anything, we measured and we said, what do you want to be when you grow up? Over 80% of the girls said they wanted to be a social worker. 80%. Why? Because that's the role model. That's what they've seen in their communities. And we gave them a cyber experience, and we're now starting to see those same kids applying to college and university and getting into the workforce saying, I can do something else, I can do cyber. It's investing in that and then providing the resources, things like the scholarship programs, the apprenticeship programs. I think it's all encompassing. And I'm so very optimistic by what Chris has to say, is the pieces exist. It's really about how do we take a look at this tapestry? How do we put it together? Because there's a lot of good people doing great things to try and help solve this problem. We just need to scale it and get everybody to not only coordinate, but to cooperate.
So Diana, Tony's just asked a $64 question. And I'll have to say, at the risk of being a bit facetious, I'm frustrated because the good news is there are lots of people doing lots of interesting things, but they are not yet taken for granted, like a plumbing apprenticeship program or an electrician's apprenticeship program. This is still something we're talking about and dreaming about. How do we break through? And while you've got the mic, Diana, I'm going to ask you to speak to the employer side of this, the demand side of the equation, because let's assume we can crack the code for the supply side and produce lots of talent for the cyber security profession, degreed and otherwise. Somebody's got to hire them. And what's the obligation of an employer in that regard? And again, Costas and Tony, I'm going to ask you to comment on that as well. And I see Chuck there fidgeting. He's got lots to say. So Chuck, keep it bottled up. We're coming to you here in just about 10 minutes. Diana, over to you.
So let me answer both together in the interest of time and getting to Chet. But I'm going to say three things, and that is the first thing that I think we need to focus on is requirements. What are real requirements? And this goes to, Chris and Costa said about defining roles, right? What are the real requirements for the roles as they are defined? Typically, what we do in organizations, in HR, is define requirements to weed people out, right? I mean, that's the goal, is to get people out. It's not to bring people in. And so when you flip that mindset and think about requirements definitions for roles in that context, you come up with a whole different set of requirements for positions. So the first thing is, I think that we need to take that step back and really think concretely and hard about the way that we are defining requirements and the why behind them, because that helps us to think more comprehensively about who might be the right candidates to fill those positions. The second piece that I'll focus on is the culture. And understanding, how the culture within the organization influences not just your ability to recruit people in and the way that you recruit people in. It speaks to the idea of these alternate pathways, right? It also has to do with retaining people in the workforce. And we have focused very much on the recruitment side. But I don't want our audience to walk away and think that that's the end of the story, because as many women and people of color that we can bring into the workforce, the cybersecurity workforce, we are seeing them leave. And the question is, why is that happening? And in order to really get a handle on that, we have to begin to unbundle the culture within the organizations that is preventing us from being able to really close this gap. And so those are two areas that we really have to focus on. And then the third is diversity. And I say diversity in a number of different ways, because one is, yes, diversity in terms of getting people who look like me, frankly, in the door. But the other is in thinking about diversity in terms of the way that we approach recruitment, the way that we approach the preparation, whatever that preparation looks like, whether it's apprenticeships, whether it's certificate training, whether it's education in a four-year institution, but thinking much more broadly about how we bring people in will also help us to diversify the individuals who come in and diversify the way that we think about what's happening in the organization so we're able to keep them in. And so if we can focus on those three very large buckets, we can begin to make much more sustained and aggressive progress.
Great. Thanks, Diana. A quick truth in lending, and then I'm going to ask Tony and Costas a question. Truth in lending, my organization and the SANS Institute have commissioned Diana to lead a research team that is exploring what we've called the experience gap, where so many employers want multiple years of experience to hire a cybersecurity professional. And frankly, we're producing graduates that don't have a lot of work experience. And they ask us, how do we close that catch-22 gap? Maybe we can speak to that. But let me also ask Tony and Costas that same question. What's the responsibility of an employer? As the Napa study pointed out, and I'll take the blame for pointing this out to them, too many employers compete for experienced talent at the high end of the labor market. They don't want to invest in converting raw material, the graduates we all produce, into that experienced talent. They leave that for somebody else, and typically it's become federal agencies by default or the military by default. How do we close the experience gap? How do we get employers to step up to the plate when it comes to workforce development? Dr. Colson, you first, then Costas, Diana, if you have anything to add, I'll let you have the final word, and then we'll let Chuck burst on the scene.
Ron, have you been reading my email or something? Because this just came up. A legislator reached out to me and said, Tony, and they had that exact same question. So I said, here, go talk to this trade group and let me know what they said. And the person came back and said, that was a very surprising answer. And I said, did it go along like this? I met with an executive of a very large company. And I said, how about this great way, pathway, nurturing, mentoring, get people in experience? And they said, you know how we recruit? We're in California. So he says, I get the In-N-Out truck. I hire the In-N-Out truck. I park it out front of my competitor. And then as people come out, we hand out our business card and we hire their people. And 2 years later, they do the same thing to us. And I said, but that's a very short term. That's a very short term. I mean, you're shooting yourself in the foot. And this is what they said to me. They said, well, then if we don't have the talent, we'll outsource it. Wow. Okay, so there's another whole perception here is, okay, we have immediate needs for talent. We're talking long-term thinking, and how do you convince industry that has their profit and loss statement that they have to hit to take a long-term view of nurturing talent along the pipeline? And I think that's where public-private partnerships and partnerships with nonprofits can really come into play, and also new ways of educating. We are trying to start this experience pipeline in the high school systems with things like micro internships and other things to accelerate that pipeline and experience. But it's really going to be kind of a collaborative and also educational effort to say, here's what's being produced and here's what we can do with it. And you as an employer, I don't know if you know, you have this at your disposal.
So Costas, what's your perspective?
Ron, I know we're out of time, so I'll just mention one idea, and that is that we've talked a lot about workforce, but we also need eventually for the private sector, talk about their awareness and organizational development. Where does a CISO sit? Where does the cybersecurity responsibility lie? As long as the responsibility for cyber attacks lies inside the CIO office, I fear that we're not going to get appropriate action from industry. I think when the cybersecurity voice becomes a business line voice, not an IT voice, then the private sector will in fact become more real, as Tony suggests with his counter example, and begin to do the right thing for hiring, because it'll no longer be meet the number, but it'll be your bottom line. We're seeing that awareness grow, but it takes time. Diana ran a program at GW for one of our financial institutions and knows quite well how difficult it was to get people that have a business line responsibility to think about cybersecurity. It's not my problem. The techies will fix it. And unless we fix that problem, industry itself will not be serious about hiring the right talent.
Diana, your thoughts?
So I'll just sum it up with an Einstein quote, or a butchered Einstein quote, right? Because he says, what's the definition of insanity? It's doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And so if we go back to what Chris said at the very beginning, we have reports, or Costas or Tony, one of you said it, I can't remember, one of you said it. We have lots of reports. And until we actually take action, and are willing to take actions that might be a little different than what we've done in the past, but who really smart people, like the people who both wrote and participated as expert advisors, and I can say that saying I wasn't one of them, but the Napa report, if you haven't clicked on that link and you haven't read it, read it, because there are really great ideas in there that were put together by people with significant experience in the field. But if we're not willing to pick those up and actually do that, then we're not going to get to that better place. And so we've got to get to that acceptance level where we are willing to take that step out of the bounds of where we are and do some of these actions so that we can actually build a robust and resilient cybersecurity workforce and citizenry.
Those are good words to end by. Let me just add this note. That may be a role for the National Cybersecurity Director, not to command. You can encourage collaboration, but we've seen how far that's taken us. Maybe there's some incentives, or there's some frameworks. There's something that are not directive in nature, but still enough of a set of guidelines and with appropriate incentives that will get us all rowing in the same direction. Chuck, I'm going to turn you loose here for 10 minutes or so. The floor will be yours. Before we do, let me thank our three panelists for your words of wisdom. That's all good stuff. And they're not leaving us. You didn't know that, did you? You're not leaving us. When we end with audience Q&A, some of those questions may be directed at our panelists too. So please stay with us. But without further ado, again, Chuck Romine from NIST. He runs the IT lab there. He's got 500 people worrying about stuff like this. Chuck, over to you to react.
Thank you so much. I'm really grateful. I have to say, this conversation has been spectacular, and just to let everybody know, my finger has been hovering over the unmute button for an hour. so I'm glad I get to chime in. Some fantastic points made, but first I certainly want to acknowledge and thank Chris Inglis for multiple times recognizing NIST's efforts in this area. I'm really excited about that. The National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education, something that NIST assumed the responsibility for way back in 2009. So we've been doing this coordination function for about 13 years now. Our role has been updated multiple times. We've released multiple strategic plans. I'll get to some of the details of that later. But I want to react to a lot of what I heard today. First, I think it's terrific to understand. By the way, I'm a little concerned. First of all, I've got an hour and a half of material, so I've got to condense it down to 5 or 10 minutes. But on top of that, it may appear to be disjointed because I made so many different notes and I didn't have time to sort of consolidate them. So I apologize if I'm going to revisit some things over and over again. But the first thing is this really important need of understanding the totality of the need for cybersecurity education. And I think Diana reminded us, we certainly need cybersecurity experts at the very cutting edge to support the needs of research and to explore new areas that are important for cybersecurity to advance the field. But we also need cybersecurity practitioners that can fill the extraordinary needs of operations at federal agencies and also in private sector areas. And as she pointed out, we need cybersecurity education as part of a well-rounded education in general. And so that we increase awareness of what Chris Inglis called our shared responsibility for this, right? Everyone has a role to play. I'd like to maybe even expand Diana's point to include high school or junior high school curricula as well. Imagine, wouldn't it be fantastic if students already had a grounding on the basics of cybersecurity when they graduated high school, the same way they have in English, math, and other areas of science. One of the things that has mystified me forever, and Diana put her finger on it, she made a really important observation that we don't really do a great job at marketing the field. Partly we focus on too narrow a cross-section of the field, this very sort of deep technical part of it. So if we can broaden the aperture a little bit to explain the remarkable breadth of the field, it's maybe people can see themselves as a cybersecurity professional. You talk to the average person, they say, oh, I could never do that. Well, that probably isn't true, but they just don't know it because we don't do a very good job of marketing it. As I have a really good friend, Donna Dodson, that many of you know, who retired from NIST a few years ago, a giant in the field of cybersecurity. And she was fond of saying, cybersecurity professionals are really great at communicating with other cybersecurity professionals, right? That's not good enough. We have to do better. So, and this is a field that, by all rights, should sell itself. I used to worry as a lab director. I used to worry that the private sector could pay a 50% premium over what I could pay in the federal government for the talent that I needed. And that used to keep me up at night. Well, now the premium is, in some cases, 200, 300%. for these very talented cybersecurity professionals at the high end. Why doesn't the field automatically have people gravitating towards such a lucrative opportunity? And I think it's because of the stereotypes. We have a terrible set of stereotypes, and I'll get to another part of that in a moment. Tony mentioned that a big focus for all of us seems to be on within the Beltway or major metropolitan areas as the only potential source for talent that could fill these do an important job of filling the gaps in the cybersecurity workforce. And it's absolutely clear there are amazing people all over this country, in North Dakota and Utah and in South Carolina and everywhere, all over the place. I'll just mention Florida, for example, which seems to have a very strong presence of cybersecurity emphasis. So we need better tools to figure out how to attract these people in these what we would consider remote areas or areas of non-traditional nexus for cybersecurity. How do we get to them? One tool that the NICE program is actually invested in is this online tool, Cyberseek, which is an opportunity to match needs and resources at the national scale. And I would encourage people to take a look at this Cyberseek. You can go to NIST's NICE program and find it there if you want. I want to pivot now to this really important issue of diversity. And Costa's emphasis on gender diversity is a critical point here. As I mentioned before, the field of cybersecurity, like many other fields, has extremely unhelpful stereotypes associated with it. And so I think there's some concern about how we tend to drive people away from the field. From my perspective as a lab director, it's clear to me that cybersecurity is as a collaborative field, and that point was made by all of our panelists here today. Collaboration is a key element of success in the area of cybersecurity. There are many research reports in social sciences that demonstrate that women tend, on average, to value collaboration more than men. They tend to do a better job at collaboration, on average. Men tend to value competition more readily. And so there's a natural niche, I think, in the field of cybersecurity for gender diversity. Costas stressed the importance of mentoring. And I think I'd go even further and say mentoring is fantastic. I agree with that. That's critical. I think we need to do even more than that. We need to champion as well as mentor. So it's important to advise people in underrepresented populations, but it's also important, if as a leader in the field, that you make the opportunities happen for people to be able to develop in those fields. I want to Diana's last point on her quote of Einstein of the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again. I think there's an important point to be made here in the area of diversity, which is everybody is now on board that we want much better diversity, both gender diversity and other types of diversity, racial diversity, and so on. But we're unwilling to change, and this was sort of Diana's point about the culture needs to change. We're unwilling to change our processes. We just want a different outcome, that's all. We're going to do the same things we've always done because that's how we know we get excellence. But we just need to somehow make the outcome magically be different and more diverse. And that's nuts, right? You can't do it that way. So we've got to go back and figure out what is it that we're doing wrong that's driving people away from this field. So, just wishing for a better outcome is not good enough. It's a first start, but we need to do better. Ron talked about the fact that we have too much emphasis on college degrees near the end here, and I agree. We have to stress non-traditional paths to get into the field, or we're never going to get where we need to go. And I think Tony's emphasis on the value of apprenticeships to ensure we sometimes we overlook, and Tony made this point perfectly, we overlook the fact that there are people who don't have the option of saying, I'm just going to drop everything and do, get some skills in cybersecurity. I just won't eat for a year, right? You can't do it. Somebody's got to, so we have to have programs for this earn while you learn model that Tony mentioned that I think is really terrific. I have to say I got a real epiphany from Diana about the difference between using requirements for job postings to weed people out versus using those requirements to try to bring people in. That just blew my mind. I thought, what a fantastic statement to make. We get so caught up in trying to make sure that we don't get applicants that are clearly non-qualified. Maybe we need to rethink what that actually means, what qualifications actually mean. So that and that importance of changing the culture so that we not only do a great job of recruiting, but also that we focus on that retention point. So I'd like to go on for another 20 minutes, but I think I need to try to wrap up here. One of the things that maybe cuts across all of this, a point that I wanted to make, I used to describe cybersecurity as an interdisciplinary field. And then it became clear to me that no, it's actually multidisciplinary. And now the NSF has begun to use the phrase transdisciplinary. And I'm thinking perhaps the right phrase is omnidisciplinary, that there is virtually no field of human endeavor that doesn't touch on the area of cybersecurity. One of the programs in my laboratory, for example, is emphasizing the social sciences in cybersecurity. How do we understand people's actual behavior, not the behavior we want them to undertake, but the behavior that actually happens? And how does that influence the real achieved cybersecurity of systems? So usability is a key ingredient in understanding that. So we've got this omnidisciplinary field that involves psychologists, sociologists, cognitive scientists, human factors engineers, economists, mathematicians, engineers, computer scientists, electrical engineers, lawyers, political scientists, quantum physicists in the case of post-quantum cryptography, for example. This field is wide open, and we're not doing a fantastic job of connecting people with those broad interests into the idea of a cybersecurity career. So I think I've gone on too long. I want to thank NAPA for a really stimulating report, and I certainly want to thank the panel for really stimulating my understanding and my. You can tell I've gotten sort of energized about this. This is really it's been an exciting panel and a lot of fun to listen to, and thank God I got the chance to use the unmute button. So I really appreciate it. And Ron, thanks for your organizing this, for your leadership, and also a big shout out to both Karen and Dan for the leadership that they displayed during the development of the NAPA report. And now I'm really excited about what's next.
So Chuck, thank you very much for your patience. But under the heading of careful what you wish for, next time we're going to put you on the panel, so you don't have to sit there and fidget. Look, obviously, folks, we're going to run a little long. We don't want to shortchange the Q&A part, so just bear with us. If you got to go. We are recording this, and let me pass the baton now to the Honorable Karen Evans. Dan mentioned her bio, but former OMB CIO, former DHS CIO, former cybersecurity guru at Department of Energy. I've known her in various lives, and she's now head of the Cyber Readiness Institute. Ms. Evans, over to you.
Thank you, Ron. And I too, Chuck, don't go anywhere, so you can take yourself off mute. I was fighting the mute button too, especially when Costa started talking about CIOs and CISOs and their roles. We could have a whole panel discussion just on that, about how to move forward. So keep your questions coming. I've had the chance to review the questions in the Q&A, and we also had several folks send questions in advance. So I tried to combine several of these as we go forward. So I'm going to throw the first one out to Costas about mentoring. Costas, there was a lot of discussions today about different aspects of apprenticeships and alternate ways to go. But what do you think could be done more out of the traditional ways to create a cyber mentorship program or programs?
Yeah, I think that Tony has given us the outline of some future wonderful opportunities to kind of get outside the very strict and rigid, DOL defined the registered apprenticeship program. Not that the registered apprenticeship isn't important, because that is a stamp that comes with it and some gravitas. But I think Tony's right that we have to learn how to experiment around the edges. However, the one key thing is incentivizing the mentor. In other words, I might feel good about some kid that's showing up in my doorstep saying, please help me. I know nothing about cybersecurity, but I'm going to learn with you. But you turn your inbox and it's full of stuff that you have to do today, tomorrow, and for the foreseeable future. And there, both the study and the previous study that I helped the National Science Foundation with, looking at apprenticeships in the federal government space, we thought that perhaps one of the big drivers is the retirement wave. A lot of people are retiring in the tech jobs. So we can get ahead of the field by taking those soon to be retired that are already beginning to look at the clock and have them be the mentors. The real truth is the apprenticeship or the mentorship programs won't get going until the very top says, let's do it. Because the argument is, why change things? We somehow muddle through. So we need strength at the top. We need to piggyback apprenticeships together with retirement waves, and we need to incentivize the mentors. Those are three things that we can do today.
So I see everybody shaking their heads, and one of the questions that came in also talked, because this is like a culture change. So I'm going to be a little controversial here, Katis, and throw out one more, and any of the panelists should jump in on this. So do you think the mentorships, a lot of times we're looking at people getting new into the program, maybe a new mentorship type of program could be for like CEOs or heads of companies and agencies? I mean, see, you guys are all going. So what are your thoughts about that type of mentorship program? So Chuck, I see you leaning back. Costas, come on.
No, I mean, I'm willing to take the bait. First of all, I've already said that unless the business line understands the importance of cybersecurity, we've lost the game. So you and I will have a special offline discussion on that. Business line is vital, and we're not there yet.
No, I agree with you.
You agree with me? Okay. So secondly, in order to get the CEO, we don't need the CEO to become cyber smart. We need the CEO to continue to look at the bottom line for industry and say, what is going to help your bottom line? What's going to reduce the risk on your bottom line? And the answer is good cybersecurity. And then he or she will have to delegate that function to people that he or she trusts. So in my way of thinking, we have to move forward. We don't need kind of cybersecurity for CEOs. I don't think so. CEOs should do what they do, which is look at the bottom line. But we need to link cybersecurity and the bottom line. We haven't done a good job yet.
So let me just say, I won't say yes, but I'll say yes and, because I want to amplify, which is, you're absolutely right. The CEO should not be a cybersecurity expert. But what we've learned is that the responsibility of the CEO is to manage all of the risk for the enterprise, right? In order to be an effective CEO, you have to manage financial risk, you have to manage reputational risk, HR risk. You have a responsibility to do all of those things, and that includes cybersecurity risk as a part of the overall portfolio. And one thing that they put in a shameless plug for the NIST cybersecurity framework here, one thing that the framework can do is provide the language that a CEO can use to ask the right questions of the folks who are on the front lines for their organization for security. And so, that's an opportunity to elevate the role of the CEO as responsible for a risk that traditionally was known to exist by the CEO, but I'm not going to pay attention that it's too complicated, right? And that's for my CIO or CISO to manage on my behalf. And if you disengage as a CEO, you're not going to get the outcome that's best for the organization. You have to engage on all areas of managing risk. So,
okay. So I'm going to combine a couple other questions that came in and also one of the pre-questions, and this is going to go to Tony. And the question overall says, how can we teach cybersecurity issues to a whole public of citizens of a country? But the other question that I want to put in with that is, could you talk a little bit maybe about experiential learning, like the experience of learning, and kind of combine all that together?
Well, first of all, that's my whole thing. If you're not doing, you're not learning, right? Yeah. If you think a student in any grade level is going to do 5-minute module or an hour a week touching something and be an expert, you wouldn't allow that to be your doctor. You know, reaching children, cyber education programs, digital citizenship. I think we've got a lot of movement there. I think we've got a lot of movement in a lot of areas. One thing that is interesting that keeps coming up to me is we as educators don't necessarily do a lot of listening to what the real challenges are in these communities and how we're going to educate them, cyber mentor programs and things like that. So I'll just give you an example of how we can re-engineer and kind of flip this into experiential learning. We said, well, okay, if you're an apprentice, if you want to be an apprentice, and all these students said, this is great, why can't you be an apprentice? And they said, well, I can't go to class and then go to work, and I don't have a car. I have to take 2 buses. And we started listening and listening and listening. He said, what if we were able to bring technical mentors from the business onto campus to help you with your apprenticeship, and you could just walk from class to your apprenticeship and do your work there? And they were like, I would totally do this. I would totally do this. So we threw this idea out and we said, who else wants to join? And we got these colleges and universities said, that is a great idea. We should probably do that. And we listened, and suddenly we have 30 students with a 250 student pipeline, and we haven't even started it yet in 3 months. And I think where I'm going with this is, it's because we're promising an experience, we're promising a career, but we're also feeding the needs of the community, especially in diverse populations and so on. And it's that kind of idea to action that we really need in this space. And then you asked a question about CEOs and so on. I get a request probably once a week to speak to CEO trade groups. I think they're hearing the message. I really do. I think they're hearing the message. Whether they choose to do something comes down to financial incentive, right? Like CMMC compliance or something along those lines. But I don't think from my seat, I don't have as much of a problem educating CEOs. I think there's mechanisms in place. What I have is mechanisms of reaching that kid that is in 5th grade who's fidgety in their seat, and we can't figure out what stimulates them. And we say, hey, there might be something. Aptitude not in you can and you can't, but aptitude in what can you do, right? Where can you go? It's identifying that mind and mentoring them along long term.
Okay, I'm also going to remind folks, if you can put some of your questions into the Q&A. It's only because we want to make sure we can capture all of that because of the proceedings that we're going to do after the panel is over, after we're done today. And so we lose some of the stuff if you just put it in the chat. But I'm keeping an eye on everything. So with that, I'm going to throw this question to Chuck, and anybody's welcome to chime in again. Because a lot of this discussion, we kind of went around it. And I think Tony specifically talked about, we talked about coordination, but we also talked about collaboration and cooperation. And so the 3 C's. So this particular one, this is another C here about cultivating. So it says, what can the federal government do to assist academia in cultivating the next generation of cyber workforce professionals?
So I think I agree with Kostas earlier observation that government isn't really the sole solution here. And I know you're not saying that, the questioner is not saying that, but I wanted to say that first because it's not a government only issue, but there are things that I think government can do. Agencies can certainly think more creatively about trying to develop internship programs or take advantage of existing internship programs, because I think that's a really great driver to get people involved. Most agencies have student programs available. The research agencies have postdoctoral programs available that can help to increase the outreach to those academic programs. You've already spotlighted the Centers for Academic Excellence and the Scholarships for Service programs. Those can be leveraged much more effectively. I think there's a long-standing inherent prejudice about community colleges, and we've got to shatter those. There are many community college programs that have taken the leadership and the initiative to establish programs that are focused on cybersecurity, some of them through the expanded Centers for Academic Excellence programs, but not all. And then, as Diana mentioned and others mentioned as well, there are many HBCUs and MSIs that are also developing strong cybersecurity programs, and we can take advantage of those as well, both to get extraordinary talent in the door, but also to address some of the needs for diversity. So those are a few of the things that I can think of off the bat.
Well, one of the comments that came in, yes, I was going to pull on you, Diana, anyway, because you're next. But one of the comments, so if you could work this in too, on your thoughts about a civilian cybersecurity reserve, if you could work that into your thoughts as well. The floor is yours, ma'am.
Thank you. So, one of the things that when that type of question about how can we get colleges and universities to, work better with colleges and universities, one of the things that I always like to point out to non-academics is that colleges and universities are businesses. And the focus of our business are the students and making sure that our students get jobs. That's our number one priority. And so what that translates into is that the provosts and the senior administrators who support the development of different types of programs are going to support the development and the resource allocation for the development of those programs to the places where the students are going to get jobs. And so the more that employers, whether they're agencies or the private sector, work with the colleges and universities with that in mind, that your students will be able to get jobs, the better traction they will get. Because at the same time, the cybersecurity people are coming, the biology people are coming, and the health scientist people are coming, and all the other disciplines are coming, and there's only so many resources to go around. And so that's something to really keep in mind as we think about different ways of engaging academic institutions with the employers, public or private. The notion of the civilian core is a fascinating one, and one that has come up over and over and again. And I think that in many ways, the National Guard is starting to kind of fill, or not starting, really has filled that niche. But the idea of creating a service corps that allows people to take their time, concentrated time into supporting the security of society, whatever type of organization, I think is a great one to continue to develop, particularly because as we have these conversations, we tend to always focus on the loud voices, which are the large employers, right? But there are many small and medium-sized employers that even in the best of circumstances don't have the resources to have their own cadre of security professionals. And so if we can figure out a way to provide that service to the society, I think it just serves us all better.
Karen, if I can pitch
Sure.
in just very quickly on this, how do we get to the general population? Two small examples from George Washington University that has a scholarship for service program, as many of the organizations that you're looking at. here. One is our scholars are taught to go out to the community and make presentations to community groups. Very simple, but it begins the process. The second thing is we had a capacity building grant from the National Security Agency to prepare pedagogical tools for SFS scholars when they graduate to go back into community colleges and be teachers at community college level, because right now adjuncts and full professors and assistant professors are thin in cybersecurity. And in fact, Tony and I are working with the National Cybersecurity Training and Education Center, and we have a special project these days to focus on exactly that, how to prepare people to teach in community colleges, because that will give us a broader foundation, not for cybersecurity experts, but for general practitioners, if you will. So those are two simple examples.
And that's great, and I appreciate that. Diana, I'm gonna give you this next question, but I'm also combining it with a few of the questions that came in during when you all were talking during the panel discussion, and that is, so what role can K through 12 play, either through traditional instruction or extracurricular activities? And also, is it, when you think about this answer, is it time for us to quit using, and this is a question near and dear to my heart, so I would appreciate anybody's insight on this, is pipeline. Is it better not to use pipeline and we start talking about highways with on and off ramps so that you can get on, get off as your education continues, as your experience continues through this profession? So it would be good to have your thoughts about the traditional extracurricular activities, K through 12, and I'm purposely not using pipeline, but provoking you right now.
You're not provoking me. I'm just trying hard not to get on my soapbox and start stomping around.
I knew you would. That's why I wanted to ask the question. I knew you would.
I'm trying hard, Karen. You know I'm trying hard to restrain myself. So let me say, in terms of extracurriculars, they're great, right? Clubs, camps, all of those things are great, but they are extracurricular, okay? And so the key here is that we don't put, and I know I keep saying this, but I'm going to keep saying this, I swear, until you guys are just turn her off. We don't put English in the after school program. We don't tell you to come learn algebra on Saturday because it's to the side, right? We don't do that. And so for me, while I think that it's great that we do these camps and these extracurriculars and clubs and all of that, and we should absolutely continue to do that, the way that we build that highway is by giving people the foundation to get on it and to go as far on it as they choose to go, whether they want to specialize in whatever area, whether they want to take an off ramp and then come back on, right? We want a lawyer, but the lawyer might ultimately decide, you know what, I want to focus on cyber law or cyber policy. So they got off of the highway and then they came and got back on. But they wouldn't have been able to do that if they didn't have the foundation. And the foundation has to begin when the foundation of everything else begins. So we have got to get to a place where we are able to get this curricular content into our K-12 schools so that in fifth period, you're going to your cyber class, just like you would be going to your English class or your math class or what have. And until we do that, we are going to be playing catch up, and we're not going to have this as the mainstream foundation for those who are at the tip of the spear and those who are in general society working in whatever general role that we can think of.
Okay, so Ron, you have your hand up. I'm going to let you talk for about 30 seconds because we have one big wrap-up question and then we can bring it to a close. So go ahead.
And it will be less than 30. I have a challenge and an offer. First of all, we ought not to worry about whether we call it a pipeline or a highway. We just need to do stuff. Here's the challenge. Florida has given my organization $20 million to disperse as grants for cyber IT educational pathways. We have over 60 notices of intent to apply for that grant money. And I would challenge other states to invest as much. And here's the offer: whatever we learn from that grant program, and it is a 15-month grant, hopefully with sustainment afterwards, but we will provide whatever we learn from that program so that folks do not need to reinvent the wheel. It's there. Take it, run. End of challenge, end of offer.
Okay, perfect. So Costas, I see you. I'm going to let you go use the little bit of time that Ron didn't use. Go ahead.
K through 12 is vital, but we don't run K through 12. We don't run the shelf, the size of the shelf where curriculum exists for K through 12. It's states and states boards of ed. If we can't, we have to impact 50 different cultures. So we start with the governors, we start with states of ed, kind of national associations. That's where the fight has to be. I think individual teachers will say, yes, I love this, but I can't give up English because right now the state tells me I got to teach so many hours of English. Where am I going to find the extra time, Diana? So the point is we need to find the flex point.
Amen. You're right.
Okay, so that was a great question. Okay, Tony, but what I want to do is make sure we gear up one more because we have a special guest. So I want to make sure that Joyce Carell, that's with us from the ONCD, is ready to go. So I'm going to let Tony have a few seconds here, and then I'm going to pose this last question to Joyce.
I just want to throw in an amen on Diana's not soapbox and Costas. But I also say innovate locally because you have school districts are really they have so much value in how this can spread. And so we're working right now. What started with one school district is now in 35 school districts and is about to go to 2,000 school districts, right? And that's integrated curriculum. There's a lot of great stuff happening out there. We just have to be able to listen and understand that we can't just push stuff down. We have to also let stuff rise up and empower those that have created amazing programs.
So I'm going to ask this last question because Joyce, thank you so much for joining us today. And I think everybody's going to be excited that you're here with us. There was a couple other questions I'm going to combine with this together, but it says NAPA, when we did the recommendations that came in the report, we wanted to know, so we're just going to ask you pretty directly here, is the ONCD planning on taking up the recommendation from the NAPA panel that it lead the cyber workforce planning?
So I'll answer that we're excited that NAPA arrived at the same conclusion that we came at. And yes, we definitely are going to be taking a leadership role. I want to repeat a few things that Chris actually said early, where he talked about, the cyber environment is technology, people, and doctrine. And he said that, people are central, to the function of cyber. So this is definitely a priority for him. When in listening to the great conversation that everybody, all the points that people brought up through this entire event, the talent pool that we're looking for, whether it's the private sector seeking qualified people from all walks of life, or it's the government, when the private sector companies want to be competitive and they want to look into the future of innovation, they are invested in bringing on people, at different stages. So I think it's easy to make that conversation to tie the bottom line to the corporate leadership to say, why should companies invest in people? And then to Chris's comments, about the few, the many, and the all. We want to reach a point where we can be resilient as a society, where the digitization of all types of things has led us to require that need. It was great to hear Diana's comments, about, mainstreaming this education in K through 12. So we're definitely looking to pull together, a lot of the great work that people have been already doing. When Chris articulates the responsibility of his role as the National Cyber Director, it's to coordinate and it's to connect the pieces. I heard people use the word collaborate oftentimes. He has a slightly different take sometimes on the word collaborate, because sometimes that means I stay in my lane and you stay in your lane, and never the lanes shall cross, and we'll call that collaboration. But that's not what Chris is looking to do, as he seeks to have coherence across, what can he do to drive better coherence in all of these areas that comprise opportunities to bring people into a very broad field.
So I am supposed to wrap up, and then I'm going to let Ron have the last few comments, because he and I are supposed to have the closing comments here with the panel. First off, I want to thank all the panelists, and especially Joyce for joining us at the end. You guys were phenomenal, and I want to thank all the attendees as well for hanging with us for the extra 10 minutes, because I think you can see the enthusiasm, and we just need to turn all that passion into action. I think Diane and I have been working on this, it seems like forever. And so we have to turn it into action, and let's do it. So I appreciate everybody hanging with us. This is probably the first of many as we go forward in really closing this gap. And Ron, I'll let you have the last few seconds here to wrap us up. And Dan.
All I'll say is thanks to everybody, those who signed in and watched, the panelists who participated, Dan, Karen, the rest of you, all of those folks that had a hand in putting this together, Joyce and your team, and Chris and company, for all that you're doing to protect the nation. This is not just a national imperative. I think it's a national security imperative. And we just need to stop talking about the what of it and figure out the how of it. So with that, thanks again, everybody. And I think that's my last word, Karen.
Okay, perfect. And Dan, you opened us up, so close us down.
I think there's nothing left to be said. I appreciate from everybody and great questions from the audience, and we'll continue this dialogue. So stay tuned.